Coming up on episode 214 of Wheel Bearings, we take a look at the 2021 Shelby GT500, the Toyota Highlander Hybrid, the BMW iX, a ride in the new Mercedes-Benz SL, update on Tesla charge connector pricing, GM's new Ultifi platform, production of the BrightDrop EV600, and a big investment from Ford in EV production. All coming up next. Did you know you can support Wheel Bearings directly? Head to patreon.com/wheelbearingsmedia and you can become a patron today. Your contributions will help fund the platforms and tools we use to bring the podcast to you. And exclusives and improvements are already on the way thanks to your generosity. So if you want to be part of an automotive podcast like no other, head to patreon.com/wheelbearingsmedia. This is episode 214 of Wheel Bearings. I'm Sam Abu-Al-Samad from Guidehouse Insights.
And I'm Roberto Baldwin from Engadget.
And we're not quite sure where Nicole is at the moment. Hopefully she'll be joining us in progress. But let's begin. Robbie, what have you been driving?
So I have been driving some secret cars. I drove I drove one and I just sat in another while someone else drove it. But a few weeks ago, I was in, what is that country? Germany, driving the BMW iX electric SUV. This is their fifth generation EV system, and I actually drove two vehicles. I drove the iX and the i4. I can't say anything about the i4 yet, but I can tell you about the iX. I can tell you that it has a very, very, very large kidney grill. And it doesn't need to have that because it does not have a radiator. It does have air intakes towards the bottom of the vehicle to help cool the battery, but you don't need the giant kidney grill. But you know what? It's BMW. It's part of their brand. And I have to just talk about the kidney grill every time you talk about BMW now. Fine. It's fine. It's fine. It looks okay. Fine. Just...
Just walk up to it from behind all the time. Just don't walk up to it from the front and you'll be fine.
Yeah. Either you're going to absolutely hate it and hate it so much you're not going to want anything to do with this vehicle, or you're going to accept what it is and be like, fine. Or you're going to be like, you know what? I like it. And so for people, for groups 2 and 3, it is a splendid SUV. It is a splendid electric SUV. I drove it around Germany. They had us drive it on some back roads. They had us drive it on the Autobahn. They had us drive, here, there, everywhere. And it did wonderfully. It is about the same size as the X5. It's a little bit shorter height-wise, but, everything else is about the same. So if you're looking at X5 and you're thinking, gosh, I wish I could get one of these as an EV, well, you can. And that's the iX. It is, again, I really, really liked it. I was surprised how much I liked it. I was surprised how well BMW's EV system has evolved. And I think we drove the i3, and I like the i3 just for its quirkiness. It was just this weird. It's like if someone made a concept car, and then instead of changing anything, they just put it into mass production and threw it on the road. That was the i3, and I loved that idea about it. And I know a lot of people are just like, why?
I think once you drive an i3. A lot of things about the form factor that may have turned you off actually fall away because, and I suspect the same is true of the iX. The i3 is actually great to drive.
Yeah, it's a fun little machine to drive. I wouldn't recommend going on long road trips. It is a small vehicle. You got a shorter wheelbase. That means every freeway bump is going to feel a bit terrifying if you're not used to driving a small car. And I'm just going to say most Americans are not used to driving small cars anymore because none of our cars, not even the small ones, are actually small.
Yeah.
But the iX, it has all-wheel drive. Dual motor. It has 516 horsepower, 564 pound-feet of torque. So you're getting a ton of power for your money. And they don't have an EPA rating yet, but they're targeting about 300 miles, which should be fine for 99% of y'all if you're looking for an EV. It charges at what is its charge rate? I'm sorry, 195 kilowatts, so it'll up to 195 kilowatts.
That's pretty fast.
Yeah. So if you're able to find a charging station DC fast charging station that'll support 195 or more. Electrify America has ones that do 350. Yeah, you can charge this thing, as quickly as you want. Not 350, but you can do it 195, which is pretty quick, and it's nothing to sneeze at. It drives well. Doesn't have a lot of body roll. The steering a little bit reminds me of the i8. The i8, the steering felt a little video game-ish. I think if you don't have a lot of, you don't have. I think the i8 was much worse in this regard, where you didn't have it was fun to drive, but it also
feels disconnected.
But you feel disconnected from the road. You don't have a lot of feedback. The iX also suffers from that. Not as bad as the i8, but you do sort of feel a little bit disconnected. I think for most people, that is something they'll probably never notice. People who are just kind of driving it around town. If you're more of a driving enthusiast, you definitely will notice that. And that's something that's sort of creeped into a lot more of the vehicles out on the road, especially with the drive-by-wire systems where, it's electronically controlled as opposed to, a mechanical directly stuck to it. It all comes down to just sort of adjusting some algorithms, I suppose, in order to recreate the feeling of as you're turning sharper or as you get some sort of feedback from the road. So the iX does have a little bit less feedback than I would like from a BMW, especially from BMW, which is a company that really wants everyone to think, hey, we're making driver's cars. So as a driver's car, you have that, but stomp on the gas, stomp on the accelerator, and it takes off, flying down the Autobahn.
Getting used to saying that.
I every once in a while, I would say every third article, I have to go back and remove the word gas and put in the word accelerator. We got to drive it on the Autobahn doing 190 kilometers. A lot of speed. So you say 60, about 100 miles an hour. So just cruise along 100 miles an hour. Comfortable, calm, collected. Just it is a vehicle, and I think a lot of EVs kind of have this tendency where you are driving faster, you're traveling quicker or faster than you think you are. You're like, oh, I must be doing 60, and you look down, you're doing 80, just because everything's a bit more smoother because you don't have, engine noise, you don't have any vibration, you don't have any of that stuff. So with the iX, you definitely end up with that sort of, oh dear, I need to slow down before I get pulled over by the German police and they start talking to me in German. I'm like, I don't know, I'm a dumb American. Overall, no, it is a great SUV. The starting price is, sorry, let me look at my notes. There we go. $83,200. It is expected in the U.S. Probably around March of 2022. They said first quarter, but I heard March from someone at BMW. So March, April, you could probably pick one up if you're looking for one, if you want a giant grill in your front yard. It is, I was... sometimes you get into these EVs that the traditional automakers are making, and you feel like this is good. This is good. This is fine. They've done this. They've done the thing. But I think with the Mercedes, with the new BMW, you're getting into them. You're like, oh my God, these are outstanding. These are outstanding EVs from these luxury brands. They're really working to make sure that they're sort of transitioning their driving experience from their ICE vehicles, their internal combustion engine vehicles, into an EV experience. And in some cases, it's better. I still think the EQS is better than the S-Class right now. It just, for the sake of luxury, again, it's like we were talking about, no vibration, no noise. It's just like this smooth, amazing feeling as you're driving it. The iX, I think the iX is better than the X5 just for that, because when you're getting an SUV, you're not buying an M car, you're buying an SUV. You want to be able to have the nice luxury and the driver's feeling of a BMW. And aside from that, the front grille, which again, if 2/3 of you will be fine with, and the sort of not a lot of feedback. I'm a big fan. I was surprised. I was pleasantly surprised, and I've been pleasantly surprised from a lot of these vehicles coming out. I mean, the Ford Mustang Mach-E, pleasantly surprised. The EQS, I'm incredibly surprised, and the same with the iX.
Did they say anything about any plans for other variants? A lower power variant. Maybe a single motor rear drive version. Or can we expect any of that to be coming in over the next year or two?
I don't think they're going to have the lower power version in the U.S. There's an M40, which we did not drive, and I think the iX40, the xDrive 40. I think when they look at the what's going on in the United States when it comes to what people want, a smaller battery is not gonna. It's just not gonna work out here. I think it's the same thing like when Mini had the Mini 1, when the Mini first came out, and they had this very essentially low power Mini, like the cheapest Mini you could get in Europe, but they didn't bring it to the U.S. because in the U.S. they just this isn't going to sell because the United States wants power. The United States, we want power and we want range. And if you have, if you have a version of a vehicle, especially now where people are still concerned about range, if you have a version of a vehicle that has less range, it's highly unlikely it'll be here. As for an M version, I don't see why they wouldn't do that. I mean, I think an M version of everything. I mean, the i4 I drove was an M version, and that's all I can say.
Well, given that M versions usually have even higher margins, it would be very unusual for BMW not to offer an M version of the iX.
Oh gosh, yeah.
It's it's an interesting vehicle. One of the things that they've talked about with the iX is that it'll be their first vehicle that they offer that has 5G connectivity in it. Did they talk at all about that?
They did a bit. I think the issue with 5G is that the rollout is still happening, and so you still have this weird people, and you can get a 5G phone, you can get a car with 5G. There's all these capabilities that are coming, but the rollout is a little lackluster. It just takes a while places like companies like AT&T are trying to they want to hurry up and kill 3G so they can repurpose those towers for 5G. So you have companies who are sort of waiting in order to kill their 3G systems so they can throw 5G, and once they throw those up, then the network increases. I think it's an important technology in 5G, especially when it comes to automobiles, especially when we're talking about the amount of data that's going to be shared from the vehicle to the cloud and back and forth. And then we have, vehicle to infrastructure and vehicle to vehicle and all that. But there's so much infrastructure has to be built around all of that to make it work, whereas just having the car with 5G is it's great because it kind of future-proofs it, well, as much as you could future-proof a phone network. And everyone who owns a 3G phone right now is like, oh, crap.
Yeah. I know. I mean, there are times when the 5G, even though my phone is showing 5G connection on there, I just can't actually connect to anything. And so I'll just go into the network settings and just say, just use LTE, just use 4G. Don't even bother trying to use the 5G. And all of a sudden everything works, so 5G is way overrated.
It is. And it's one of those things where eventually. And so we're just sort of waiting for the eventuality when 5G is actually a network that is reliable and widespread. And right now that's not really it. But, we'll see how it works with our network this year. I mean, it's these automakers need to sort of look at, they got to look 15 years into the future for their cars as opposed to your phone, which they're just waiting, 3 years, 4 years for a phone. That's what, if Apple and Google had their way, it'd be every year.
And we've got something we'll talk about later that, touches on, building in hardware that you may or may not actually be using today, but will potentially be used at some point in the future. We'll get to that a little later on. But in the meantime, what other vehicle did you experience?
So I got to sit in the new Mercedes SL, and if you're not a car fan, a fan, like our car enthusiasts, everyone's number one car that they love is the Gullwing, the Mercedes SL, the Gullwing. So it's sort of the official, it's sort of the official car that everyone loves. And so this is the SL Roadster. It's coming soon. They didn't share any specs. They didn't tell me, I do know it's all-wheel drive.
Oh, really? The current ones aren't, right? Oh.
Yeah, the current ones are not. So it's all-wheel drive. And it looks a bit like the current, but I know that they're working to make it lighter. They one of the things was make it lighter, make it more nimble, lighter and nimble. And from the passenger seat, it's always weird to like sort of talk about a car when you're sitting in the passenger seat, because you can sort of experience what's going on, but not directly, because your input isn't driving the experience. Your experience is based on someone else doing things to try to impress you. It's like when you get in the car with your friend, they're like, look, this car will do 0 to 60 in this much time. And so, it was a fun drive. I think it's going to do well. But there wasn't a lot of information shared. It was interesting to talk to them though, because they, that car was one of 30 vehicles, and 30, like the 3 or 4 of a bunch of different models that Mercedes brings over, and they drive it all around the United States. They drive up north. They drive San Francisco. They drive to the desert. They drive in. I was in Colorado, in Denver. And they bring these vehicles over in order to test them on the roads and test them in these extreme environments, test them in very high altitudes, test them with our fuel, which apparently is not as good as European fuel. And so they bring they bring these cars over to test them so they can make sure that the everything that they've researched and everything they worked on is real. It actually passes the tests. And so that was sort of interesting, because we talked about how every time they learn something, they send it back to Germany, and then Germany's like, oh, okay. And then if they have to make a change, it makes a global change, and it gets sent to all the vehicles in that model, all the vehicles of that model that are being tested. And so it goes out, and then they drive around, and then, we got to make a change. And there's a big computer in the back. And so it's very interesting to sort of ride along in a vehicle that hasn't actually been unveiled yet. It was camouflaged in the front and the back, so you can see the profile, and then it had but for the most part, it sort of looks like the current SL. And it still has that Mercedes feel, where you have to be able to create a vehicle that, if you're trying to create a performance vehicle for a Mercedes, you still have to make sure that vehicle feels like has that Mercedes luxury ride. And so, he put in comfort mode, and it was very, placid and very, for a vehicle that small. And then, he puts it in sport mode, and it feels very, very grumbly and ready to party. Business is front, party in the back.
And they've got, actually, I think on the last generation, they went back to the soft top, right? So they got rid of the retractable hard top and went back to a soft top. And I think they're retaining that for this one.
They have a retractable roof. So I will say, though, that the retractable roof, because it's a pre-production car, once they pulled it down, sometimes they had problems getting it back up. So I was the first. There was 5 journalists there, and I was the first. And my drive was I had the roof up on my drive, just because we had to go through some dusty areas, and we spent a lot of time stuck in traffic before we hit the mountains. So it was, and it's
And they didn't talk at all about powertrains in this one?
No, they're not. They haven't shared anything yet.
Okay.
It's very much what's under the. It's probably a V8. It's probably 4-liter V8. But they that's That's just an educated guess.
I would guess they'll probably have the 4-liter twin turbo V8 and the 3-liter inline 6.
Yeah,
both with the 48-volt mild hybrid system.
Exactly. So. Yeah, that's the usual Mercedes setup. Yeah, but it's always sort of fun to sort of to ride in something that you're not supposed to know about. Even if you don't get to drive it, which, I'm like, oh, okay. You beg and you plead and you're like, come on. Yeah. Come on. And they're like, no, we're not going to let you drive our $1 million car, which, by the way, all those pre-production cars, they're very expensive. And so whenever I have a chance, occasionally I'll get a chance to drive a pre-production car, and you're just like, oh, I hope I don't break this. It's like driving a very old car. Like something from the museum, like both of those situations, you're like super excited, especially for the older vehicles, but also super anxious because at least with the pre-production cars, they're like, well, we got parts, we can just throw it on here. It's going to be a pain in the ass, but fine. It's with the classic stuff, they can sort of rebuild the part in their workstation, but you don't want them to. And they definitely do not want to. So, yeah.
No, definitely not. I mean, from my engineering days, for 17 years, I got used to driving stuff that was not even yet pre-production. It was like sometimes very early prototypes or even mules. And so I was used to things breaking unexpectedly in very weird ways sometimes.
I've been in pre-production cars that just shut down on the freeway. Like mules. I've been in a mule that you're riding alongside and just turns off. You're like, okay, just pull over and restart the
car. Back in like 2007, one of the last things I worked on as an engineer was the brake system for what was supposed to be the 2-mode hybrid Saturn Vue. Which was their compact crossover, and they already had a mild hybrid system in there, and they were going to put in a strong hybrid, and there were some issues, and that car never actually made it to production. The whole program got canceled when GM went bankrupt and everything, but when I was driving around the Milford Proving Grounds doing testing with that and working on calibrating the software and tweaking the software. From time to time, when I would do a stop, with the brakes, and I would pull over to the side to take a look at some data, before, tweaking something else and moving on. Every once in a while, after I pull over, it just wouldn't start again. It was like completely dead. It'd go out and, pull the big fuse out of the battery and, wait a minute, basically try to do a hard reset, plug it back in, hope it would start. Nope. And so there were on a couple of occasions where I actually had to call back to the garage and have somebody come out with a push truck and push me back from the track back to the garage, so they could take a look at it and try to figure out what was going on with the thing. I mean, that happens in development. You've got stuff that's not, stuff that's been hacked together and all kinds of weird things happen. So,
like, while we're building this piece, we're just going to cram this piece from another car in here and hope for the best.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, we won't talk about the battery fires. All right.
They say variety is the spice of life. They also say that Drizzly is like having the world's largest liquor store in the palm of your hand. So why not combine the two things they are constantly talking about with Drizzly, the #1 app for alcohol delivery? Drizzly connects you directly to their local liquor stores to compare prices so that you get the best deals and have access to a huge selection of beer, wine, and liquor. I went and checked out what they have for whiskey, and I definitely have some new things that I'd like to try the next time I make myself an old-fashioned. So go check out Drizzly now by downloading the Drizzly app or going to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com and use promo code SPICE5 for $5 off your first order. That's drizzly.com and use code SPICE5 for $5 off.
Since we last spoke, I also had a couple of different vehicles. I had the Ford Shelby GT500 Mustang, which is currently the top of the line, fastest Mustang you can get, and actually, I guess certainly the most powerful production Mustang to date, fastest accelerating one to date. The version I had was largely a base version. It had the heated, only a couple options on it: the heated and cooled seats, the racing stripes. It had the vinyl over the top stripes, which is interesting. On the GT500, you can get stripes two different ways. You can get the vinyl stripes, which are $375, or you can opt for the painted stripes, where they actually, take the body, comes out of the paint shop partway through the process. They mask it by hand, spray the white stripes over the entire length of the body, and then bake it, and then put it back into the paint shop again for the clear coat. So the clear coat is actually on top of the stripes, and you can tell when if you go to it, if you see a GT500 and you see the stripes actually extend all the way to the edge of the hood, on the grill, rather than stopping just shy of that. And if you run your hand over it, you won't feel the stripes on the painted ones. You'll feel the vinyl stripes because they're on top of the clear coat. The painted stripes, if you want that option, $10,000 as opposed to $375 for the vinyl.
I mean, that sounds cool, but that's a
that's a hell of a lot of money for a very subtle difference. But the GT500 has the 5.2 liter V8 with a big honking supercharger on it, 760 horsepower. So this is essentially Ford's answer to the Hellcat. This is, as I said, is currently the fastest accelerating Mustang you can get. It'll do 0 to 60 in about 3.5 seconds. Next week, I'll actually be driving another vehicle that has a pony badge on it that will accelerate to 60 miles an hour in roughly the same amount of time, but does it with zero emissions and no noise. And that's the Mach-E GT. But the GT500, it makes a lot of noise. It's very loud, especially if you start it up and it's not in quiet mode. Because a couple of years ago, Ford on the Mustang introduced something they call quiet mode, different exhaust modes. So it opens and closes different valves in the exhaust system, and you can get a quiet mode, which they also nicknamed the good neighbor mode. And when I got up to go to a meeting last Wednesday, and I fired up the car, my wife was in the bedroom at the opposite end of the house, and she knew as soon as I hit the start button, she knew it was running because this sucker is loud, and it is quick too, and it rolls on Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 tires, which you would think by looking at them, they look nearly like slicks. They don't look like tires that would do well in anything but dry weather conditions, but it had been raining that morning, and I had to go to a meeting, and they did surprisingly well. I was shocked at how much traction I actually had. Now, granted, I was very gentle with the accelerator pedal. Didn't do anything foolish with it. I wanted to make sure that I got there in one piece. But I did notice at one point, I was driving up Telegraph Road to Pontiac, that when I went to change lanes, as I crossed over the white lane lines on the pavement, I could feel the car squiggle a little bit, just as the tires traverse those white stripes, because there was less traction there, and I could feel it kind of moving around underneath me. So I knew at that point, it's like, yeah, I definitely better be very careful with this thing. It's a lot of fun to drive. I'd say it's a lot more fun to drive than previous GT500s. In the past, the GT500 was very much really just a drag strip car. It was great in a straight line, but they never handled very well because they're more nose heavy than any other Mustang because that engine with the blower on there and everything, it's got a lot more front weight bias, and they were generally not great handling cars. But this current generation, I mean, it's really been transformed. I mean, certainly being on the S550 platform helps a lot. You get independent rear suspension, but they also come standard with things like MagnaRide dampers and really good wheels and tires, big brakes. I drove it back in late 2019 when they did the launch program at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, and it was really impressive on the track there. It's not quite as good as a GT350 on the track, but it's also got 200 plus more horsepower than the GT350. Unfortunately, you can't get a manual transmission with the GT500. It's only comes with a 7-speed DCT now, but if you want something with this much power, that's pretty much the way it's going to be from almost everybody now. It's increasingly difficult to get really high-powered cars with manual transmissions anymore.
I just feel like a lot of people would just be melting clutches. Like you just have a lot of people coming back a week later with just the clutch melting from the from the transmission,
the bell housing.
From the bell housing. Just like, well, there you go. That's why we don't give you all manual transmissions.
Time
you
for another
can't
one.
handle them. Yep. That's why you can't have nice things.
Yep. So the Tremec 7-speed DCT on this thing works great. No complaints there. The base price on the GT500 is $70,300. With the options that I had on here, including the technology package, which includes the 12-speaker B&O sound system. All told, it came to $78,470, including the delivery charge. If you want a really fast, really loud Mustang, this one will definitely do the trick. Whether it's worth another 20, 25 grand over a Mach 1. I don't know. I'm not sure it is, but it is. It's great at being what it is, and it's also quite thirsty. Over the time I had it, it averaged about 15 miles per gallon, which is why it also that 66 or almost $7,000 worth of options / other on top of the base price includes a $2,600 gas guzzler tax. So so it does have a thirst for fuel, but it'll get you to the next gas station very, very quickly.
Yeah, no, I was at that Las Vegas launch as well, and it was surprisingly well mannered on the track. I was surprised at how well, and that independent suspension. Once they went to that, you're like, okay, finally. And that was something I would just harp on Mustang owners for years, for decades about that rear suspension. It was just like, it's trash rear suspension. The rear suspension is trash. You have one single axle. Why? What year is this? And even my friends who had Mustangs, who had Shelbys, are like, yeah, we know. But then, but now, no, it is a fun car to drive. It is very loud. We got we got to do quarter mile runs in it in Vegas, and that was fun. And we had an autocross set up, or I guess it was like an autocross. But it is a big, loud, fun car that is very, very expensive. I don't know if the fun's worth $70 grand.
Yeah,
that's
speaking of autocrosses,
that's between you and your financiers.
Yeah. Speaking of autocrosses, last Sunday, I went to an autocross with my daughter. She bought a Toyota 86 last spring, and she wanted to try autocrossing and asked if I'd go with her. So I said, sure. So we went to one put on by the Detroit Region SCCA on Sunday, and there was somebody there with a new GT500. And that is definitely not the car you want to use for an autocross. As good as it handles now, it's too big, too heavy, and too powerful for an autocross. On this course, and it's hard to say how much was the driver and how much was the car, but that particular car was consistently was running about 51 to 53 seconds for a lap of that course. In my 1990 Miata with all of 116 horsepower, I ran a best of 46.6. So I was doing about 5 to 6 seconds faster than a GT500. So it's definitely not an autocross car. High speed cruising,
sweeping,
back roads, no problem. But definitely not, or even on a big track, take it to a proper track day. But definitely,
big track.
if you're going to go to an autocross, leave the GT500 at home. Find a Miata or a Toyota 86 or something, or a BRZ. Those are really good for that. The other vehicle that I had was the Toyota Highlander Hybrid, which I've previously driven earlier in the year. The new Highlander, I've said before, it's not, I think it's an attractive vehicle, but I actually prefer the design of the previous generation Highlander. This one's got, kind of some long sweeping curves. It's got the bulging rear fender that kind of echoes the look of the Supra, which I'm not entirely sure works on a big 3-row crossover like this, but it's not bad, but it's not my cup of tea personally. Inside though, it's vastly improved, much nicer than previous Highlanders. Got a much better infotainment system. That I'm really liking the new Toyota infotainment system, much better than the old Entune. Works with CarPlay and Android Auto, but even the embedded stuff works reasonably well. Although the voice recognition stuff for navigation, like if you want to use navigation or use voice recognition to input a destination, it's still pretty hit and miss. Not as bad as Volkswagen, but still pretty hit and miss. So if you want accurate voice rec for your navigation, stick to your Siri or Google Assistant for that. But otherwise, it's a lovely, family crossover. Holds 7 people, and with the hybrid system on there, it's on this generation of the Highlander. They went from the previous generation used a hybrid system with 3.5 liter V6, so the same setup that you'll find in the Lexus RX. The new one, they're using a 2.5 liter 4-cylinder, so they went less performance, more fuel economy, and it pays off. If what you want is a really fuel efficient big SUV, 3-row SUV, this is the beast for you. It's 243 horsepower combined between the 4-cylinder and the electric motor. So for a big vehicle like that, it's not slow, but it's not as quick as what you'll get with the V6 in like a Telluride or a Palisade or an Explorer. But none of those vehicles are going to get you 37 miles per gallon, which is what I got driving this thing around, which is very impressive for such a large vehicle. So if you're looking for a family hauler with great fuel economy, this is the one for you. And the one I had was all-wheel drive. And it was the Limited, so it was loaded with all the goodies, LED headlights, and all the current Toyotas. It comes with a full suite of driver assist systems, the Toyota Safety Sense 2.5 Plus, with pre-collision warning, pre-collision system, pedestrian detection, adaptive cruise control, lane centering, the full gamut of just about everything you can imagine. The 11-speaker JBL audio system, 8-inch, larger touchscreen. It's a 12.3-inch center touchscreen display. So it's very responsive. Got big touch targets, very easy to use. All told, this came to $47,100. No, wait, that's not right. $50,363, including delivery. So just over 50 grand, which, is not cheap, but by comparison with, the competition, it's in the same ballpark as the competitors. And the 37 miles per gallon that I saw is actually better than the EPA label fuel economy, which is only 35. So it's if you're even though you're spending a fair bit amount of money on this thing, you're not going to spend a whole lot on fuel for it. So there's that. And that's it for the Highlander hybrid. Have you driven the Highlander, the new Highlander?
I haven't driven the new one because I haven't driven anything with the new Entune system.
Okay.
And so it is. I'm looking forward to it because the old Entune system is a pile of garbage, and
Yeah.
It was, and I think Toyota knows that it was a pile of garbage. I think they understand that. I know for a few years they were very reluctant to allow Apple and Google to connect to their vehicles because they didn't want to give up that space to these third parties. And they finally sort of relented while they were working on their own system. And I think that's what a lot of automakers have done. They've sort of relented and allowed these systems into their vehicles because that's what customers want. As they work on their own systems, as they work to sort of, make their systems better. I mean, I find myself in Mercedes, like not really using CarPlay at all. But I'm using MBUX. I'm just yelling at the car the entire time. And so as these systems get better, and that's not to say MBUX is perfect, but it is better than most of what everyone else has on the market. So as these systems, as they advance and get better, people will probably sometimes they'll be like, well, I'm listening to music here, but I want to use this system because, it works, especially if you have an EV, you're like, oh, it'll help me find a charging station. Whereas, Apple Maps and Google Maps doesn't really take that into account, when you're driving.
Yeah.
They're supposed to with the Bolt, but I don't know if that's come out yet. But yeah, so I think there is a sort of reluctance and then allowing it and then hoping that they can catch up and hopefully surpass these systems at some point.
Yeah, and with this new Entune that's in the Highlander, it actually, if you're using CarPlay or Android Auto, it splits the screen about 1/3, 2/3, or maybe a quarter or 3/4. So you get 3/4 of the screen for the smartphone projection display, and then the other quarter keeps some of the embedded Toyota stuff in there, so you can swipe up and down through various things. So if you want to see the energy flow for the hybrid system, or see some of the other Toyota features in there, you can still see that in there. You can also swipe across and switch the position. So if you want the smartphone display on the right hand side and the Toyota stuff on the left, where you can get it closer, you can have it that way, or you can just swipe and swap. They swap places. So that's there's quite a bit of flexibility built into it, and it's a fairly easy to use interface. The icons are easy to you look at them, easy to figure out what they are, and what is what to tap for whatever function you want. So I would say it's a more attractive system and definitely much more functional. And if they can just get to a point where their embedded voice recognition works better, then then I might be less inclined to use the smartphone system.
Yeah, a lot of companies. I mean, you have Volvo and Polestar. They're going with Android Auto, so using using Google Assistant, and then there's companies that are going with Alexa. Using the Alexa assistant, essentially, you're just embedding that voice system into your system, so that people
that's what
can.
Stellantis is doing.
Yeah, Stellantis, and I think that's kind of smart because you're sort of, you already have tier 1 suppliers. You're using Bosch and all these other tier 1 suppliers for parts for your car, and I think there's portions of the infotainment system that if you can't do it, if you don't have the resources to build a robust voice assistant, then maybe just use what other people have and just be, partner with them and make it, if you can use their technology to make your system better, then that's, thumbs up.
Absolutely. All right, let's discuss a few of the things that came up this week. First of all, I just want to touch base. We had a couple of emails from people about follow up on my comments on the last show about the price of the Tesla charge connector. And I misspoke. I was referencing a price that was from quite a few years ago. At one point, they did in fact charge $3,000 for the charging cable, but it's now much cheaper, depending on which one you get. The higher power one, I think, is $520 now, and there's a even cheaper one that is only $300 now. So, or actually, $275 for the Gen 2 mobile connector bundle. And so that gets you a cable and an adapter to plug in to a standard 120 volt outlet, or there's also a NEMA adapter included in the kit as well. So
it's funny that
if you have a dryer outlet.
It's funny that it has a NEMA adapter, but the maximum power output is still 1.3 kilowatts, which is just what you get from a 110 volt.
Yeah, well,
house.
they that's if you want the higher power, the higher charging power, that you have to pay. That's for the $520 cable.
Yeah,
that gets you the I think 7 or 8 kilowatts.
It's still way cheaper than my Hyundai one, which was again like a lot over $1,000. Like, whoa, my gosh! It's essentially sort of the same thing.
So earlier this afternoon, you and I were both on a briefing call with GM, where they announced, and this is part of, they're actually making a whole bunch of announcements this week and in the early part of next week ahead of their investor day that they're doing next Wednesday, where they're going to be trying to convince Wall Street that, hey, we are a modern tech company and we should be taken seriously and valued like a modern tech company, not a 100-plus-year-old automaker. So today they announced something called Ultify. Do you want to try and explain what Ultify is?
So Ultify is GM's, it's their plan to make their infotainment system and the systems and a bunch of other software that's in the vehicle more like a smartphone, more like something that they can upgrade over the air. You get over the upgrades, which everyone is essentially either doing or plans on doing. But also they want to be able to sell you subscriptions for certain features. So if you want to use Super Cruise, but you don't want to buy Super Cruise for you don't want to go out and spend so much money for Super Cruise and then pay the monthly fee every month for it. You only want to use it for maybe a road trip you're going to do. Well, you could just essentially rent Super Cruise for, a month or a week or whatever. They haven't really, it's a lot of fuzzy and hazy what's going to happen with this when it comes. They didn't really have any like solid, like, this is one of the things we're going to do. It was a lot of like, well, we could do this and we could do this. So it's these companies are sort of, it's additional revenue stream, because if you can give people additional features that they can subscribe to and they can sort of turn on and turn off as they need it, and that's revenue that as we move to EVs, I think they're going to start losing, especially when it comes to trucks. I mean, trucks are just money-making machines, and at some point, you're not going to be able to make a truck for like $5 and sell it for $25, which is essentially how the entire truck industry works, like pickup trucks. And so with that going away, they have to figure out other ways to start making money. And with GM, they have Ultify, which, it's, if there are features that you want to add to your vehicle later on, you can. And if there are features, if you don't want it to be part of any of this, you can just have the regular infotainment system that they have. They announced it. They talked a little bit about things they could be doing, what they think they could do, but there's no real solid what they're going to do with it, other than it's going to sit on top of Linux, and it'll sit beside some vehicles that also have Android Automotive. So it was very sort of hazy. It was sort of a hazy bit of information, but it shows that they are thinking about becoming, essentially looking at what Tesla's been doing and saying, hey, why don't we do that? Because those people seem to enjoy that.
Yeah, as you said, it's a platform that sits on top of Linux, and it'll provide developers with APIs that they can use to access basically any vehicle data, and create all kinds of different apps that with potential revenue streams, whether it might be one-time purchase or subscriptions, and it'll also allow GM to make apps like you talked about, the potential for renting a feature like Super Cruise, and we've heard, about other automakers. BMW, has talked about that, with their latest generation stuff. They're looking at providing subscriptions to various kinds of features like heated seats, for example. You just subscribe to them in the wintertime, and then in the summertime you don't need them. I think for the manufacturer, I think having a platform like that is fine. It's gonna, it'll give them the potential for some new revenues, depending on how they price the stuff. I'm going to be fascinated to see whether consumers are actually interested in paying a subscription fee for all these different features. That's the big unknown that, nobody has quite figured out yet. How much real willingness is there for people, when they've got a car payment already, how much are they going to be willing to pay nickel and dime for all these other things that they, may want to use?
That's tough.
Like I say, big unknown.
It's tough because BMW got slammed over their idea that you had to pay an extra $80 or whatever a year to use CarPlay, which I could get CarPlay in a Hyundai for free. If I had a Hyundai, it supported CarPlay. Boom, I just had CarPlay. And BMW tried to set this thing up like, well, if you pay us $80 a year, you can use CarPlay in your car. And people lost their minds, and rightfully so. And so, even during and again, this is all sort of hazy when they talked about, they didn't really specify any real features that are coming or subscription services that are coming. But one of the things they noticed, like, whoa, what about real-time traffic? I'm like, well, we get real-time traffic for free right now, essentially. If I have to pay for real-time traffic in 3 years when this goes live, I could just plug in my phone and get real-time traffic. If you're pushing people away, you have to be very careful with these systems, because you can push them away. And like we said when we talked about like giving up that space to Google and Apple. If you push people back to Google and Apple, that's a bad scene, because you're putting all this research and development, and you have these developers who are building these apps, and if you're not compelling enough to pay $5 a month, $10 a month, $20, we don't know what the pricing will be, by the way. Then
and there's a whole other issue as well, which is getting developers to actually build for the Ultify platform. If you look at the mobile phone market, we have basically two operating systems today, two platforms. You got iOS and Android. And there used to be others. Nokia had their system, BlackBerry had their platform. There was Windows, Microsoft Windows Mobile, and all of those went away in part because they didn't have enough market share, and developers only have so much resources to support different platforms. Today, there's, in most cases they support both Android and iOS, but in some cases they don't even bother supporting Android. They'll only do iOS or only do Android. And for an automaker to try to put its own platform out there and say, hey, come and build apps for our platform that's completely incompatible with what Ford is doing and what Volkswagen's doing and what Tesla's doing. It's like, who's going to do that? Especially when you look at the size of the market, the automotive market, it's in terms of unit volumes, it's quite a bit smaller than the phone market. Apple alone, Apple sells, maybe 300 or 400 million iPhones every year. All the various Android vendors sell, upwards of 1 billion or 1.5 billion phones every year. And, we sell about 90 million vehicles a year globally. And then you split that up, among a dozen or more different platforms to develop for. I see it's going to be really tough for them to attract anybody. Ford tried to do this with their Sync AppLink system, when they launched it over a decade ago, said, here's some APIs, you can have your apps connect to our car, and you can, users can control the app on your phone through AppLink, and through the voice recognition. And, you look today and there's maybe a dozen AppLink apps. I don't see it attracting a whole lot of attention from third parties. It's going to be really tough for GM or anybody else to do that, because it's just going to be too fragmented. So
they're going to get Spotify and iHeartRadio. Those are the two they're going to get.
Yeah.
And then that's going to be it. Because I'm assuming they essentially, what Spotify and iHeartRadio do is build containers for a web page that loads. That's it. Yeah. I think they just build a container for a web page.
And that's what Pandora was doing for years. Pandora was on every vehicle. They did the same kind of thing. So, okay. Another one of the news drops from GM yesterday was about BrightDrop, which is their new electric commercial vehicle business unit. Back in January, I think, they announced BrightDrop and announced their first product, the EV600, which is a big delivery van, big box van, like the big FedEx and UPS vans that you see. So this is a larger van than even the biggest Ford Transit. And they announced the other day that they had only kicked off the whole BrightDrop program 20 months ago. They decided to do this to build, electric commercial vehicles on their Ultium powertrain platform. And they developed and got this thing into production in just 20 months, which is pretty amazing. I mean, compared to a typical consumer vehicle, it's a lot simpler vehicle in a lot of ways. So, and they had already developed the powertrain and the batteries and everything. So they're basically using stuff from, that's going to be in the Hummer EV and various other vehicles. But they've started low volume production of this thing. They're towards the end of next year, they're actually going to be building these things in higher volumes at their plant in Ingersoll, Ontario, that currently builds the Chevy Equinox. The Equinox production there is going to end in April of next year, and then they're going to retool it for BrightDrop production. But until then, they're working with their supplier that's actually making most of the equipment that's going to go into Ingersoll at their facility here in Michigan. And they're doing low volume production. The first 500 units of this are going to FedEx, and they plan to start, delivering these vehicles in the coming weeks, so that FedEx can start using these before the holiday delivery rush, before, they're delivering all the Christmas stuff and Black Friday stuff. So they don't know exactly how many FedEx is going to have in its fleet by the end of the year. But by early part of, by probably the end of first quarter of next year, they should have 500 of these EV600s in the FedEx fleet. Then they also announced the addition of a second model, the EV410, which, they have a very creative naming scheme. It's EV and then a number that represents the cubic foot volume of the cargo area. So the EV600 holds 600 cubic feet of stuff. Yep. EV410, 410 cubic feet of stuff.
That if you're a fleet, if you're a purchaser for a fleet management company, that's the best thing in the world, by the way.
Absolutely.
Well, it's an electric vehicle and it's 600 cubic feet. Well, how much does this one have? Okay, yeah, that's cool. We can do that.
Yeah. And, depending on what the use case is, fleets, buy different sizes of vans depending on what they need. The 410 is going to be pretty much the same size as a long body, high roof Ford Transit. So, you'll see them, plumbers and electricians and stuff using them. And, the bigger one is used by delivery companies, things like that. So that's, I think we're going to start seeing a lot more electric vans, driving around our neighborhoods, delivering our packages that we order online. Amazon has already got several dozen of the Rivian vans running in about, I think, 5 cities now. They started in LA earlier in the summer. They've got some here in the Detroit area now, and there's 3 other cities. And Amazon's ordered 100,000 of those for delivery by the end of the decade. So I think delivery vans are going to start getting a lot quieter in the next year or so.
Yeah. I talked to BrightDrop. I talked to Travis, the CEO of BrightDrop, and the chief operating officer of FedEx a few months ago about what they were doing, what was going on. And FedEx had already been sort of testing them, and they were talking about what was interesting is, like you said, like the ability to scale because they are part of GM is a huge reason why companies like FedEx are interested in BrightDrop. Because if you have some sort of small EV startup, if that startup
like
collapses.
Workhorse?
Yeah, if that startup collapses, like Workhorse, or just like dozens of other ones. But if you have Workhorse and you buy these and then they just sort of disappear, the company disappears. What do? How do you get these fixed? Whereas GM has, there's factories and service centers and people who can sell them and service them and whatever. And, you can do all these things because you're associated with GM. And so for these big companies like FedEx and whoever else is looking into buying these things, that is a big selling point for them. And I think, being able to scale quickly because they're associated with GM, it's you can sit there and say, well, these cool startups are doing this thing, but they don't have the resources that GM has. And those resources mean a lot to these people who are buying, even if you're buying 10, if you buy 10 of these and the company collapses, you're screwed. If you're FedEx and you're buying, hundreds of thousands of these, then you're like, oh. So, yeah, what Rivian did was insane.
That's why, Rivian, they got lucky that Amazon decided, okay, we're going to use you guys, and that basically put Rivian on the map, and said, okay, we've got at least 100,000 committed sales. That's a big help to a company. But, and that's why, Ford and GM and Stellantis, because Stellantis is also launching next year an electric version, or rather than 2023, an electric version of the ProMaster van. Because they already sell that in Europe as the Fiat Ducato, the e-Ducato. So there's going to be an electric ProMaster, and Ford is launching the e-Transit this fall. So they're all three of them. They're leveraging that same kind of attitude that customers have. Their customers are going to be more willing to buy from a known quantity, that they're already buying vans from. So they already know how these things work. They've already got a relationship with the fleet sales guys and with the dealers, for maintenance and everything. It's I think those three companies in particular, and also Mercedes and then Rivian. I think Rivian is like the one newcomer that I think has a solid chance of succeeding. Mercedes is also bringing an electric version of the Sprinter van. And those four companies, though, right now, they dominate that market for those kinds of vans. And it's I think they will largely continue to, with the addition of Rivian in there as well.
Yeah, I think Rivian's the sort of the odd man out in that situation, but that Amazon deal that's game changing for them.
Yeah. Speaking of Ford, did you hear their news yesterday?
They're spending a lot of money on EVs.
Yeah. Between Ford and SK, $11.4 billion to build 2 new campuses dedicated to ramping up EVs. One's in Kentucky, about 50 miles south of Louisville, where Ford already has 2 big assembly plants that build Super Duties and full-size SUVs and the Ford Escape and Lincoln Corsair. And then the other one is in Tennessee. So in Kentucky, they're building. Back earlier this summer, they announced they're doing a joint venture with SK called Blue Oval SK to build batteries, and they're building 2 battery plants in Kentucky. And then in Tennessee, they're building this massive complex that they're calling Blue Oval City that includes 2 more battery plants, plus Ford's first all-new greenfield assembly plant since 1969. The last time they opened a brand new plant on a new location was the Kentucky truck plant in Louisville. And that opened in 1969. And they're building a new electric truck plant in Tennessee near Memphis and they're going to be expanding electric F-Series production down there. And what's interesting is I was on the call with Lisa Drake, the COO, the other day, and they're not talking specifically what products they're going to build there, other than to say F-Series. And this is the first time that they're not just saying F-150. With the plant in Dearborn where they're building the Lightning starting next spring, that is specifically an F-150 plant. This new plant in Tennessee is an F-Series plant, which implies that they're going to be building F-150s and Super Duties there, and potentially other form factors as well. Between those two, they're planning about 11,000 new jobs. Ford is putting in $7 billion of that investment, with the other $4.5 billion coming from SK. This afternoon, there was a story that came out in the Detroit News, quoting Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, saying that Michigan never even really got a chance to bid on getting either of these facilities, which is interesting, because when you look at what's happening with the EV production, they're trying to localize more and more of it, and especially getting battery plants, relatively close proximity to assembly plants, and it would seem like it would have made more sense for Ford, to not put a plant in Tennessee, because right now they don't have any production in the Southeast. But they're doing that. And, Ford put out a statement basically saying that, these two sites in Kentucky and Tennessee, had the amount of space that they needed and other facilities, and they were ready to go. They were shovel ready to start construction right away. And they stated that, there was nothing available in Michigan that met their needs. And I think that that's only part of the story. I think that there's another piece to this, which is politics, because if you look at the way the defense contractors work and space contractors for NASA, when you have big expensive projects that run way over budget and way past schedule, like the Space Launch System or the F-35 fighter, a lot of people complain, well, why don't we just kill these projects? Well, part of the reason why members of Congress don't vote to kill these projects is because the contractors have learned a very important lesson over the years. When there's jobs in a representative or a senator's district that would be lost if they voted to kill a project, they're much less likely to vote to kill that project. So if you look at something like the F-35, Lockheed Martin has hundreds of subcontractors. They literally have production of at least some component of the F-35 in almost all 535 congressional districts in the United States. I think that's over 500 of them have some part of the F-35 that's being built there. Same thing is true for the Space Launch System. There's pieces of that being built all over the country, which is why Congress never votes to kill those things. My guess is that Ford is doing something similar with their decision where to put these plants, because if they're making all this investment in building EVs and building batteries, and the same is true for other automakers, and they want to make sure that there's actually consumer demand for these vehicles when they get out there. And so when to do part of doing that is getting the incentives, getting the tax incentives for sales of the vehicles, getting incentives for building charging infrastructure, and to do the representatives that are most likely to vote against something like that are in places like Tennessee, Kentucky, and other southern states. And so if you spend all this money in their states and employ a whole bunch of people in their districts, they're going to be a lot less likely to vote against those things. And so I'm thinking that was a big part of Ford's calculus and why they chose to put those plants where they did.
I mean, that's really smart because if you, it really, I mean, a lot of Congress just wants to keep their job. That's all there is to it. They just want to keep their job. They want to be voted in. If Ford puts a giant factory in Tennessee and they're employing thousands of people in the state, and either state or national politicians in that area are voting against essentially their constituents' employment by voting against infrastructure systems and EV rebates and or tax credits or whatever, that's going to be bad for them. So when you have when you have your constituents saying, "Hey, I work at this car plant, this truck plant or whatever, and we're making electric cars, you need to make sure the electric cars are going to be on the road. And you need to make sure that when we have electric cars that you can drive them everywhere and all this stuff." So you can, if you sort of diversify and like you said, like Lockheed, just sort of throw your stuff into everything so that if anyone votes against you, you're like, look what you're doing to your people and your, in your district. Yeah. It's tricky and it's unfortunate. That's how companies have to do, because I mean, the F-35 is a piece of trash, but But if Ford makes a good product,
same could be said about the SLS too.
But if you're building a good product and you need, I'm fine with it. If you're building a good product, if you're building trash and you're just sort of holding it over people, then that's going to be an issue we'll have to deal with, I guess, in 5-ish years.
Yeah. But I'm guessing that, as GM announces the location of more of its battery plants, as Stellantis does the same and other manufacturers do the same, we may see a similar strategy of putting them in states where, they need some help to convince senators or Congress critters to vote for these incentives.
In the fossil industry states.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Lucid officially started production of the Air yesterday, and they'll start delivering those sometime later in October to customers. That's all we know at the moment. None of us have driven it yet. Let's dive into a couple of listener emails before we wrap it up for the evening. First one is from Mark Shakespeare, and it's kind of a long one here. It says, many thanks for continuing to provide an informative and always entertaining podcast. Love Nicole's Boston driving insights, since for my first few years in the U.S., I lived in Massachusetts and realized that the state driving motto was attack the space, a required skill when driving towards and into Boston. Not sure how that will play out when Boston drivers all have Torque Monster EVs. So my VW GTI Mark 7 Sport is now 4 years old, 1 year outside of warranty. According to the armchair experts in the social media forums, for the last year, I've been living on borrowed time, and I need to switch out my check engine light bulb if it is not coming on every time I start the car. Joking aside, this is my third GTI. It's a great car and does everything really, really well. That said, I think it's time to go back to rear-wheel drive. Miss my old FRS for the next car. I really would like an Alfa Giulia TI with the sport suspension, but the nearest Alfa dealers are 5+ hours drive. I called our local Stellantis dealership that does Dodge, Jeep, Fiat, etc., but not Alfa, and they said they cannot do warranty work on an Alfa. I understand that a dealer would need service team members with Alfa training, access to Alfa diagnostic software, and the dealer would need to carry some parts and also have access to the parts. All it said, could a large company like Stellantis with so many brands be legally able to allow franchise dealers to provide warranty work on a brand? Alfa Romeo, even if the dealer was not an authorized seller of the brand, seems like a great way to sell more cars. Experts on the social media forums would say that Alfas are not reliable, and indeed some publications would agree. I do not have enough Alfa experience to say one way or the other, but having access to a dealer who can do warranty service work seems like common sense. No matter what the brand. So as far as the Alfa reliability goes, I think there were some problems early on when they launched the Giulia. As far as I know, most of those have been sorted out, and they're generally pretty good right now. Talking to our former co-host, Rebecca, she drives an Alfa Stelvio and hasn't had any issues with it. So I wouldn't necessarily be too concerned about the reliability if you were to buy one now. But servicing, what do you think?
That's tough because I think Alpha is a bit like Volkswagen right now. I think, the Volkswagen thing, like he said, like if his check engine bulb isn't coming on, it must be burnt out. Volkswagen, you're either going to get like an amazing car that'll last for 500 years, or you might get something that's not so great. I think that's where Alpha is right now. I think that's where Stellantis is as a whole. I think there were years and years where you could get a Fiat or a Dodge or whatever, or a Chrysler, and you just knew it was something weird was going to happen with it. And I think their quality has gone up, but you still have those sort of weird, one-offs issues. And I think when the Alpha, when the God, I can't remember the name. What's the Giulia. When the Giulia first came out, there were a lot of cars that came out that had a lot of issues. And I think and of course everyone just pointed like, well, it's an Alpha. But having said that, 2 or 3 years down the road, the manufacturing is essentially gotten better. And also the Giulia is an outstanding vehicle. It is so great to drive. It was so wonderful. I love the Giulia. But not having a service center within 5 hours? That's
5 hours.
That's tough. That's tough because what happens if something goes wrong? And who do you send your Giulia to? And that is a huge bummer, especially for such a great car that it's Alfa Romeo. They're sort of slowly been introduced back into the United States. But that also means that they've been slow. You have to get dealers and spinning up
There's
a
limited dealer network.
Yeah, spinning up and having a dealer support an automaker that may or may not be around in 10 years is really tough, especially if you're not in a large metropolitan area. If you're in like LA or New York, San Francisco, Houston, whatever, you're probably better off because they're like, well, we can afford because there's going to be a lot more people and more people will be interested in this vehicle. Whereas if you're like, say, in Fresno or Cleveland, it might be a bit tougher where you're like, well, we're going to sell 1 or 2 of these. Is it really worth it to have all this staff trained to work on the 1 or 2 when they do break down? So God, I want to tell them to buy the Giulia because every time someone buys a Giulia, an angel gets its wings. But 5 hours. That is.
Yeah, as far as the other Stellantis dealers not servicing Alphas, I think it basically comes down to the fact that the Stelvio and the Giulia are basically unique among the everything that Stellantis sells in North America right now. They don't really share any components or systems with other Stellantis brands. Across Jeep and Dodge and Chrysler and Ram, there's a lot of shared stuff, and most of the dealers sell multiple brands anyway. So to ask those dealers, to service Alphas if they're not selling them, it's hard to make the case to, you can't really force them to make that investment, if they're not selling that brand in the parts and the training and everything else. So I can see why they don't service Alphas if they're not selling it. There are alternatives. I mean, I agree with you, Robbie, that the Giulia is a fabulous car to drive. But if you want to go rear drive, there's other solutions. Take a look at the Genesis G70. The Kia Stinger, is another nice one. There's always, BMW.
There's the BRZ, which is, but I think I feel like he's looking for something a little bit classier than the Golf.
Yeah, which is why I suggested the G70.
Yeah, the G70 is a step over. Yeah.
Yeah, the G70 or the Stinger, I think, you should take a look at those. And, at least particularly for the Stinger, you can find Kia dealers almost everywhere. Not quite so much for the Genesis, but you probably still find something relatively close to where you are, I would think. So take a look at those as alternatives. All right. Next one is from Ron. My 2014 Nissan Murano transmission died again at 193,000 miles, and I don't want to put any more money into it. I drive them till they die. Do I get a 4Runner or a Telluride? I know the Kia has more fluff. I'm just looking for long-term reliability. What do you think? 4Runner or Telluride is a replacement for the Murano?
So, yeah, the Telluride is going to be a lot more comfortable to drive. It's going to be, like you said, more fluff. It's going to be a nicer driving experience. Your family might like you a little bit more if you get the Telluride. Just because it's a wonderful car, and I think Kia and Hyundai, the whole Hyundai Motor Group has really brought it when it comes to reliability in the last 5-10 years. They've finally they sort of shaken off that sort of the horribleness that they used to be and become this like very solid automaker. That said, if you plan on doing anything off-roady, you get the 4Runner. Of course, the 4Runner is going to drive more like a truck. So you're trading a unibody for body on frame, and that's and when you do that, it's going to drive like a truck. But you can. I love to talk about the Top Gear episode where you have a Toyota Helix, which is essentially the Tacoma, and they drop it off a building. They do all these insane things. They drive it into the ocean, and the truck just keeps going. And that's what you're going to get from Toyota. If you need a vehicle that eventually you want to see on TV being driven around by freedom fighters or terrorists or whatever in the desert, it's going to be the Toyota 4Runner. You cannot kill a Toyota truck. That's what I've learned.
Yeah, you will probably have no problem at all matching that nearly 200,000 miles with the 4Runner and then doubling or tripling that.
Oh yeah,
if as long as you maintain it. Given that you put 200,000 miles on a 2014 Murano, I'm assuming that Ron doesn't do a whole lot of off-roading.
Yeah.
So, I'm not sure if he's looking for a change of lifestyle in addition to a change of vehicle. So if you are looking to go off-roading, then definitely, at least take the 4Runner for a good long test drive, assuming you can find one. Before you sign on the dotted line, make sure, take to heart what Robbie just said about the ride quality, and make sure that that's something you can live with for 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 miles. And if it is, then go for it. If you want something that's more akin to the way the Murano felt, that will probably last at least as long as the Murano did, and have more room in it than the Murano, then the Kia is probably your best choice.
Yeah.
All right. And finally, from Michael Burns, who I think we answered a question of his last time as well. It says, episode 212 really nicely dovetailed into 211 regarding the Volvo and the Polestar EVs. Thanks for taking my questions about the XC40 recharge and EV pricing and tax credits. Regarding Nicole's feedback on the Polestar, is the XC40 Recharge basically a lifted Polestar 2 all-wheel drive model with Volvo livery? It sounds and looks like nearly the exact same car. Polestar places are scattered around the U.S. The closest to Atlanta is Charlotte. Are these separate Toyota-like franchises or Tesla-like franchises, i.e. everyone pays the same price for the car, or are these just Polestar dealers where haggling is going to come into play? So let's address that first. Let's address those first two questions.
It is. It's the same. It's sort of the same. It's just a lifted Polestar 2. I think there's a little bit of tuning when it comes to how they handle. I just finished a review for Wired for the XC40 Recharge, and every time I drive that car, I forget how fast that thing is. It's over 400. It's 402 or 8 or somewhere between 400 and 410 horsepower. And it is just like you stomp on the gas and it slams your passengers' heads into the headrest. It is ridiculous that how quick that vehicle is. If you're concerned about the Polestar places, if you rather, the Volvo dealership network is obviously a bit more robust. The XC40 Recharge is it's a nice subcompact SUV. The efficiency level isn't as high as some other automakers. You're only getting 220 something miles of range, but you get 150 kilowatt DC fast charging, so it charges a little bit quicker than other cars in that area. But it is, yeah, both of them are, yeah, again, they're sort of the same car, but you're
Yeah,
talking
they're the
about
same
the two-wheel
platform.
drive. Yeah, they're the same. They're kind of they're the same platform. Yeah, it's right. Drive them both. See which one do you like better. If you need just a scooch more room, maybe the XC40 might be what you're going for. If you want a little bit more sportiness, then the Polestar 2 would be your jam.
And the Polestar's also got a much bigger center touchscreen than the XC40 does.
Oh yeah,
Even though they both
got that
use
big-
the new Android Automotive infotainment system, you get a bigger screen in the Polestar. And the Polestar franchise, or the Polestar dealers, the places as they call them, there are still relatively few. They're adding more and more all the time, but it is more like Tesla. They're not factory owned. I think they are franchises, but there's no haggling on the price of the car. So it's pretty straightforward. And honestly, right now, doesn't matter where you go, you're not going to be doing much haggling on the price of the car. Whatever they've got in inventory, you're going to pay that much.
Especially for used cars right now,
at least. Yeah. So continuing along, regarding Robbie's experience with the Kona EV, did you find yourself having to pay a premium with current chip and or inventory shortages? And have any of you noticed disclaimers on custom car orders about parts that may have to be installed later because of chip shortages? The Polestar 2 website, for example, lists parts, features that have to be installed at a later date due to semiconductor availability. So did you have any of those kind of issues with the Kona?
So I think, and I'm going to say that this is probably one of the perks of my job is that when we came in, my wife told them what I do for a living, which is I write about cars and I review cars and I know a lot about cars and I've driven this car before. And she had never driven the car before because when you get a car, you're not allowed to, like you're the only person that's allowed to drive it. That's how it works. I can't just give it to like my wife or cousin or whoever. And so I think it made them a little bit nervous. And there was a markup on the vehicle, but they removed it because I'm like, well, and as they were breaking it down, I'm like, well, there was a markup on the vehicle. I don't want to pay that markup. But like, oh, no, we removed that. So you can push them to remove it. I know people who have had, they're having issues with their Broncos. I think that's, there's tons of stories of people out there who are, they order a Bronco and then the dealership's put a $10,000 premium on that. A Bronco they ordered last year or more, and they're adding these premiums to these people right before they get their cars, which is just it's just a horrible move. It's a great way to make people not want to go back to your dealership is what it is. I didn't have that issue. I think they were they were very nice and they were very accommodating, and I made sure. But you have to sort of make sure, especially when it comes to buying these vehicles. You see that price, say, I'm not paying this, and be happy with walking away. I think that's one of the things that if you fall in love with a car, they know it. They because they deal with people who are looking at cars all the time. If you fall in love with a car and they see it, they're just going to be like, well, we can't do anything about it. But if you're happy to walk away, especially towards the end of the month when they have quotas they have to deal with, you can get them to budge at least a little bit. I am not a fan of the dealer markup. I think it's sort of a jerk move. When an automaker says, oh, this car starts at this much, and then you go to the store and you're like, no, we're charging more. It's like if you went to Target to buy a video game and the video game maker says it's $60 and you go to Target and Target's like, well, everyone wants this video game, so we're going to charge you $80.
Yeah. It's kind of the flip side. The price on the sticker, there's a reason why it says manufacturer's suggested retail price. This is the price that the automaker says you should probably sell it for. But, franchise dealers are independent businesses. They can literally sell it for any price that they want. If they want to sell it at a loss, they can do that. And the flip side of being able to haggle and get the price down by $5 or more $1,000 is that sometimes when there's something really popular, it might be more than the sticker price, and that's just the way it is. And like you said, you got to be prepared. If they're charging too much, just walk away. Just let them know that I'm not going to pay that, and just walk out the door. And depending on how popular the vehicle is, I mean, unfortunately, in cases like the Bronco where it's very popular, they can get away with stuff like that on those kinds of vehicles because they know that if you walk away, somebody else is going to walk in 15 minutes from now and they're going to be willing to pay it.
Oh yeah,
and that's why they can do it. And it's basic supply and demand. When there's limited supply and a lot of demand, the price goes up, and when it's the inverse, the price goes down.
I don't think there's a huge demand for the Kona EV. All they did was a refresh. They made it a little bit cheaper. It's not the Bronco. I don't think I could have walked in and said, I know some friends who've been able to knock like half off. Instead of paying $10,000, they're only going to pay $5,000, which still feels like ugh. But they were able to knock at least some of that dealer markup off. If you really want a car and it's in high demand, especially now, it's good luck. It's a tough time to buy a car right now.
As far as features that car makers are saying, when we have the parts, bring it back and we'll install it. Most automakers are not doing that. They're either just shipping it without certain features, or they're not shipping the vehicle at all in some cases. One example of shipping without certain features, story came out today that GM is suspending installations of Super Cruise on the Escalade and delaying the launch of Super Cruise on some other models, like the expanding onto the CT4 and CT5 beyond the V models, because they just don't have chips, and they'll start putting it back on later when they have the right parts. So it's kind of a mix. It depends on the feature and which automaker it is. And then for your enjoyment, Robbie, since you mentioned Greyhounds at the end of the show before the Toyota guest, you can fit two Greyhounds side by side in a quad cab Ram 1500. So there's that.
Boom! There you go. I have a big German Shepherd and then a little German Shepherd, and that is our number one. When we bought our Kona, we had to make sure, how are they going to fit in here? I'm like, well, if I leave the seat up, they have more headroom. And it's no different than we're driving them around in our X-Type or Jaguar 2004 Jaguar X-Type. So they have essentially the same amount of headroom. But I will say that we went on a trip earlier this week, and whenever we go on a long drive, more than like a couple hours, we rent a minivan, which is typically a Chrysler Pacifica or Voyager or Dodge Grand Caravan. One of those is essentially what you get when you rent a minivan, and we just put them in the back of that for long drives. But if you can get getting two Greyhounds in a 1500, boom, you're happy. Your dogs are happy. You're happy, and you got a lot of torque, I guess.
All right. And I just checked Twitter, and there's also a couple of questions there. First one from Patrick Frawley. Wishes and expectations for the new Integra.
Oh man,
I know one.
It's gonna.
I want the Civic Type R powertrain in it.
Oh yeah.
I want the Civic Type R
that transmission, that transmission, and that everything. Yeah, that is what, and the suspension. Everything they did with the Type R is magic. Wizards. Yeah. I don't know what sort of black magic they used over at the Honda engineers, but yeah, if they can take that and put it into the Integra, that's it, and make it all super handling, all-wheel drive. Boom, I'm happy.
Perfect.
Put it in my pocket.
Okay. And then last one from Car Snob, spelled with two A's instead of an O. How would you electrify the future Miata and maintain its identity? So, as a Miata owner, this is going to be an interesting one to watch. On the next episode, Nicole and I will be discussing the Mazda MX-30, which we both drove this week, and we can't share our thoughts on that just yet. But I have good feelings about what Mazda might be able to do with an electric Miata, and I think if they can manage to keep the weight down, then I think it could actually be really, really, really good. And I will leave it at that.
I didn't drive the MX-30, so I can say whatever the hell I want. I think if Miata can get a battery chemistry that gives you 200 miles out of a, say, 50 kilowatt hour pack or smaller, that's going to reduce the weight, and that's going to allow you to keep the sort of the nimbleness of a Miata with an EV powertrain. And maybe a few. I mean, I think that's going to be a few years from now, just because I feel like Mazda's a little bit behind, and they're teaming up with, who are they teaming with? Toyota for their batteries. Yeah. So that
they're
that's
partnering with Toyota on a lot of their electrification stuff. Although the MX-30 stuff they did themselves. They did that internally, and I think that they're going to be using a lot of Toyota's stuff going forward on the next generation EVs. But yeah, I think, if they can if they can squeeze a 50 kilowatt hour battery, like, down the center tunnel, maybe do something like a T-shaped pack like they had in the Volt. But in reverse. So you have the top of the T at the front where the engine is today. And then down the center tunnel. So instead of being completely under the floor, that way you keep that low seating position on either side of the tunnel. I think you could probably get 50 kilowatt hours into that space and be, really, it's not often that you're going to take really long road trips in something like a Miata anyway. So if you got 200 miles of range, even 175 miles of range, in a Miata, and then the electric motor at the rear axle, I think that could actually work really well. And I actually have kind of high hopes for it.
If they can give me another inch of room to sit in it, or the headroom, a little bit more headroom, I would definitely a 200 mile Miata, electric Miata. I would just throw money at them. All I want is an EV convertible. And I would love it to be a Miata, and I would love it to, because Mazda, how they're going to do EVs, I think, I haven't driven the MX-30, is they're going to continue to have that sort of driver first mentality when it comes to tuning and suspension and cornering and all the things that you expect from a Mazda. All the wonderful things you expect from Mazda. I feel like they're late to EVs, but the EV world isn't a sprint; it's a marathon. So they can be a few years late. Yeah, Toyota can be a few years late. Honda can be a few years late. Mazda can be a few years. Essentially, Japan can be a few years late and still be fine, because it's not like they're losing money by doing it.
Yeah, I just looked at the numbers today. So far this year, EVs represent 2.5% of vehicle sales in the U.S. So there's still a long way to go, and there's still room for everybody.
Which is growth, which means more and more people are buying EVs, but it's 2.5%. People are still buying a lot of CRVs and CX-5s and whatnot. So it's, I have thoughts about the MX-30, and it's like sort of disappointing range in my view, but you got to start somewhere, and they're starting a little late, so they're starting there with that, and I'm very excited about what everyone who drove that car, when it comes to everything else about it, how they feel, and hopefully it's a Mazda, and hopefully they're able to continue that when they go full bore into EVs. And yes, an MX-5 EV would be outstanding. Fingers crossed.
And with that, we'll call it a show, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.